Hello everyone and welcome. Thank you so much for joining us tonight for our live stream. We're here once again with Reggie in the Himera Shrine Hall in Boulder, Colorado. Reggie, thank you so much for being here. Before beginning, I would like to offer some orientation to how tonight will go. In a moment, Reggie will offer some guided practice and a talk. At the end of that, he'll answer your questions. During his teaching, feel free to email any questions that you have to livestream@dharmaocean.org. That email address is located just below the video player on your webpage. Please include your name and where you're from, and we'll collect questions over the course of the evening and offer a selection of them for Reggie to answer at the end. Tomorrow you can check back on this page for a recording of tonight's live stream. So that's all. Thank you so much, and I'll turn it over to you, Reggie.
Thank you. Cheers. So it's wonderful to be back here and be able to talk with everyone. At the beginning of each of our live streams, I want to say a little bit about the practicing lineage. And each week I'll try to say something a little bit different so that people who are joining us for the first time get some orientation. And then I want to do some practice with you. So we hear a lot about meditation these days, and what an amazing difference from 50 years ago when I started practicing myself. And meditation really was not only not known, but if it was mentioned, it was regarded as some kind of very strange behavior that in a way separated you from the mainstream of American society. And now it's quite the opposite. Meditation among many, many people, as you know, has become a very, very valued and very appreciated approach and technique. Most of what I think we hear and most of what we read in the press has to do with the benefits of meditation to people who are just starting, or people have been practicing for a while, and I'm sure all of you are quite familiar with these, such as enhanced immune system, normalizing our neurotransmitters, our serotonin, our dopamine, reducing the levels of our stress hormones, norepinephrine and adrenaline and the others, and generally creating much more of a sense of being in ourselves so that we're not so pulled out and so distracted. And these benefits actually continue into our relationship with other people, and as many of you know, there's been a lot of research as well showing how our ability to sense and to feel and to care for other people is greatly enhanced in people who have a regular meditation practice. So this is a very, 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 very welcome development, a very good thing, and the benefits, which are now, I think, accepted, throughout Western societies, really are quite stunning when you think about it. I know many, many physicians and psychotherapists who are meditators and who use meditative techniques in their healing practice. Body workers who bring a sense of the somatic into everything that they do, not just in terms of their own particular school or technique, but as a kind of total approach to life. So the development of appreciation for meditation and the number of people beginning to explore it is really expanding exponentially. But there's something that isn't often talked about, and it was such an important part of the Asian tradition and is very much a part of the Dharma Ocean lineage, which is meditation can become a vehicle or a crucible for the unfolding life of our own person. There's a very amazing woman who was born in 1098 named Hildegard of Bingen. She was a Catholic, a contemplative, and she figured out a long time ago, even before my hero William Blake, that that everything that we do is all about life. And for her, the divine, what is ultimately real, what is ultimately sacred is life itself. And she went to very, very great lengths in her own life and took a lot of chances in order to say yes to the human person and yes to the inborn urgency that we all have to grow, to love, to create, to be, and to experience everything that we possibly can. That incredible inspiration of Hildegard of Bingen comes down through all the centuries, and it comes down to us. When we meditate, there's something more than just enhancing our own situation and improving our health and improving our state of mind. Meditation is a way of clearing out the one major obstacle that keeps us human beings from growing and maturing. And that obstacle is what we call the human pathological ego. There's a healthy ego that we talk a lot about, but there's a pathological ego. And the pathological ego is always referencing itself. It's always setting up images and ideals about itself. It's always pushing away things that are foreign or unknown or mysterious, and gathering to itself things that are familiar and seem to be safe. In modern cultures, we don't have the kind of social interaction and the closeness and the intimacy that past cultures have had, which serve as a kind of antidote to the narcissistic ego. And because of that, the modern ego is much more rigid, it's much more fragile, it's much more brittle, and it's much more of a suit of armor that actually walls us off from other people and from the world around us. So, in the practicing lineage, this particular problem is exactly what is addressed. We work with ourselves and we gradually dismantle this pathological ego, and we find something else underneath it. It's very healthy. It's still a sense of self, but it's not a sense of self by being cut off from everything else or by aggrandizing itself. So there's a journey, and in this fall, I want to continue to talk to you about community and the kinds of practices we can do to come into a greater sense of interconnection with other people. And really, when we talk about community, there are a lot of levels here that need to be explored. The first one is just a sense of feeling connection with other people, having a sense that we are in connection. And in order to do that, we have to be in our body and in our heart, because that's where connection makes itself known. But then, beyond the sense of connection, then there is the communication. There is the ability to be with people and to not just talk on a kind of superficial level or lip service level only, but to communicate with their basic state of being. One of the interesting things about the great interest in diversity now, diversity which we call inclusivity in Dharma Ocean, is that it represents a recognition that actually, particularly those of us who belong to different kinds of groups, racial groups, cultural groups, national groups, sexual orientation groups, groups, according to our age, groups according to gender, that we have, I think without realizing it, we have retracted in a way into our group identity, and to such a point that we actually don't see other people. And when we talk to them, we're not talking to them, we're actually talking to our version of them. People who tend to be on the lower socioeconomic scales are extraordinarily aware of this. I had a very dear friend many, many years ago named Vincent Harding, who was a speechwriter for Martin Luther King during the days when Martin Luther King was alive and giving speeches and really changing the world. And I met Vincent at the University of Colorado, where we were both part-time teachers. And he was such a, he affected me so deeply, our friendship. He was an amazingly kind and wise and intelligent and insightful and most of all selfless person. And one time he said to me, Reggie, we African Americans, we see you. We see you white folks. And we understand you. And actually we love you. We love who you are. And the reason that we understand you is because we have suffered so much at the hands of you white folks. But you don't see us. That completely blew me away. And I've spent the last, probably this conversation happened 20 years ago. I spent the last 20 years thinking about it and beginning to explore it myself. And also, as I get older, beginning to realize this whole thing about that we don't see each other. It's very widespread. It's everywhere. Young people don't see middle-aged people. Middle-aged people don't see older people. Older people may actually, because they are in, what I would call a despised class in the world. They do have some understanding, and plus they've been there. They've been through all these stages of life. But they're not seen. People I work with who are older feel they're not seen at all. So when we talk about, in the practice of the Dharma and the practicing lineage, when we talk about connection, and then we talk about communication. Communication is actually incredibly challenging and incredibly difficult. It's not just sitting down and talking to somebody, it's beginning to ascertain and see who they are and what they've been through. We're not going to be able to do this just by reading books and taking courses, this whole notion of community in this way. I was thinking of my relationship with Caroline, my wife, and that it has taken me so long to find out what happened, how she lived, how she grew up, the pain that she suffered, the patterns that she developed in order to actually just try to get through. When I first met her, I thought, this is a no-brainer. I love this woman. I want to share life together. All these things that we think in the beginning. And over time, I began to realize actually how little I saw. Actually, day to day, this person I lived with, how little I saw, and how much I had to give myself away in this process that we're probably going to be engaged in our whole lives. And so it is with all of us. In order to actually communicate, there has to be such an enormous interest in the other person, and interest in, how it is for them, and a tremendous amount of curiosity about how they see us and how they experience things. It's so important that we don't sit around and think that what we're going to get is all that worked out, all that tidy, and all that sane, all that non-neurotic. It's not going to be. It's being in community, in communication, involves a tremendous amount of messiness. So that, how does meditation really enable us to be in community in this way that is truly a community, truly a sense of openness, and in the anthropologist Victor Turner's words, a communitas, able to be with other people where, although we have functional roles and there are functional hierarchies and there are differences in health and age and gifts and economic status, nevertheless, in true community, those fall away, and they become things that we need to know about each other, but they don't become our own personal defenses against intimacy with somebody else. How do we do that? So this is the, I think, really very compelling message of Mahayana Buddhism, that the path of meditation begins to open up in the very beginning, simply, as I mentioned last week, simply connecting with our own state of being, and then learning how to be with it through meditation, learning how to really be nothing more than our actual state of being. But then, as Trungpa Rinpoche used to always say, if you want to continue to grow, you're going to have to take another step. And that other step is you're going to have to actually let go of your little fortress, and you're going to have to open yourself to the people around you, not as they might be in some ideal way, but as they actually are, in all their grittiness and all their pain and all their confusion and all your confusion. And the only way to hold that space is if you are grounded in the basic empty, open awareness of your own nature. Otherwise, you can't tolerate your own messiness, your own turbulence, your own torment, your own confusion, and your own impermanence, much less anybody else's. So, connection, communication, and then as we apply the tools of meditation to our relationships, the next step is communion. And communion is the intermingling of experience. The intermingling of experience happens in a lot of interesting ways for us with people we're very, very close to. For example, with small babies, when the baby arrives in a family, the baby requires that we let go of our boundaries and that we allow ourselves to commune with the state of being of that baby, the baby's openness, the baby's pain, whatever it may be, the baby's happiness. And it also happens, obviously, with people we love deeply, with lovers. There are moments when, as I mentioned, we transcend our individual boundaries, and it also happens when we're in a tremendous amount of pain. And, particularly that comes up with people that we're very, very close to. And normally what we do is we wall it off for other people. People of a different race, people who are very upset because how they've been treated. And, from a certain point of view, the way I view a lot of the agony in the world, and, particularly terrorism is, as many people know, it comes out of unbelievable human suffering and disconnection, disenfranchisement. People become so desperate that, desperate why? Desperate, it isn't just political desperation. It's not just social desperation. It's the desperation of people who want to live and are not being allowed to. It's the desperation of the slaves in the South during the period of slavery when they were not allowed to live. They were not allowed to flourish. The sacredness of their own state of being was pushed down and repressed and denied, and they were killed. It's a desperation of the universe itself which will not allow life to be quelled. All of life wants to live. And when we look around the world and we see a lot of the torment and crime and terrorism, obviously it has to be addressed, and it has to be addressed in a very strong way. But we must never forget that there is something very fundamental that is going on there that's not about bad people. It's about people who are not being allowed to live. People who, because of their circumstances, can't give birth to what's inside them, to the immense creativity and openness and joy that is potential in each person. So in the practicing lineage, this notion of communion, strangely enough, goes far beyond the people in our family or the people in our group. The call of Mahayana Buddhism is to extend our sympathy, our empathy, our openness, our sense of connection, and our communion to really everybody on the planet. And it's an unbelievable challenge. But again, that's how we grow. According to Mahayana Buddhism, it's by opening and learning to see and suffering and making mistakes with other people, and then beginning to see how they are and beginning to see why they are. It's an interesting dynamic that in families, often when you have maybe a couple of children in the family already and then a new child is born, that child is going to take up psychological space that nobody else is taking up. And so that the family unit potentially is a little microcosm of human wholeness. Normally what happens is because the ego reigns supreme, and a lot of us haven't worked things out, that families turn into these, very conflictual situations, and maybe one or two people are set aside as victims, and they play that role. But the notion that everybody in the family needs everybody else it's a strong one. To quote Malidoma Some again, in his village, when a child is born, everybody is very curious, like, what is this child here for? Why did this child come? This child came, but we don't know why, and we have to figure it out. We have to figure out what they're doing here, why they showed up, why the universe gave birth to this individual person at this particular time. And what is this child bringing, to all of us? That is very much the attitude of the Mahayana. There's a teaching called Chittamatra that every person that we meet holds a part of ourselves, and that we're meeting that person because they are bringing back to us, potentially, if we're open to it, a part of ourselves that we've lost, a soul part, if you will. And this applies very, very much across the races. And I think that's what Vincent Harding was trying to tell me, that African Americans and white people, opposite ends of a historical spectrum, the one, the oppressed, the brutalized, the disenfranchised, the dehumanized, and the other, in a very similar way, because of their role in the whole situation, very dehumanized and cut off from this whole huge part of themselves that they see, that they meet, when they meet an African American. So in the Mahayana, in a way, the more we meet people who are different from us, the more important they are to us. They bring back to us things that we need to be whole. So there is this notion that many of you have heard of in the Mahayana that until all beings are enlightened, I can't be enlightened. That perhaps rather strange teaching means that until we discover our interconnection and our communication and our communion and our identity really with all the people around us, we will never be whole and they will never be whole. So it's a very beautiful social teaching. In the work that we're going to do this fall, what I want to do is give you tools to uncover the things that I've been talking about tonight. And the first step in that is going to be stepping back and doing a little meditation practice together, which I'd like to do with you in every session that we do. Tonight I'm going to show you and practice with you how to remain home with your experience and how to develop the capacity to remain home no matter what's going on, and therefore to be, the person who is home is the person who's truly open. The only way to not project onto the world and to receive the world on its own terms, receive other people on their terms, is if we don't exit and try to get something from them or manipulate them or do something to them. So this is the practice of shikantaza, which we also call the practice of pure awareness. And at this point I'd like to lead you through that practice. So if you will, take a posture that's comfortable for you for meditation. You can be sitting on your cushion. I happen to be sitting on a bench with no back. You can be sitting on a chair, but just not leaning against the back of the chair. If you do need to lean against the back of the chair, just slide your buttocks back so that you can still sit upright. Okay, so we're going to transition into a different part of our brain right now, into our soma. So to begin with, just feel your back line. Feel your spine, feel your back. And let your awareness simply lie along your spine, just inside your body. When your awareness is back, you're opening into a space that is not conceptual. It's the space of direct experience. So we're just being along our back line, being along our spine with our awareness. As you do this, see if you can notice where your spine might be a little bit restricted. Where do you feel some restriction in your spine? And then move with micro movements, adjust, go a little forward, tip your body to the right, to the left. There is a feeling in everybody's spine, even if you have all kinds of spinal injuries and problems, there is a point where what's called the subtle body along the back of the spine is open and unrestricted. So we're looking for that feeling of ease and non-restriction in our spine, in our back line. And then see if you can have a subtle sense of the energy rising along the spine. You're not doing anything, you're just there, but there's a very subtle sense, especially on the in-breath, of a movement, upward movement, very, very subtle, you could say, of the space. And just be with that. You can enhance that by having a sense of breathing into the lower belly very lightly. So we're breathing into the lower belly, below the navel, into what Zen calls the hara. And as we breathe into the lower belly, bringing the breath back to the spine, and naturally it travels up. It's very subtle. It's like space moving upwards. So breathing lightly into the lower belly, feeling the energy of the prana, or the breath, rising. Along the back line. And let it come up to the occiput, the little bump on the back of your head. It's very, very gentle, very slow. And so the lower belly space, what we call the central channel, this back line of space, and the occiput are connected, one process. So see if you can feel that. So from one point of view, you're doing something now. I've given you a first part of this technique. But all you're doing is actually tapping into the field of unborn awareness in your own body. You're just tapping into it. You're not really doing anything. But we use this technique as the gate. Breathing into the lower belly. Upward flow. And a slight feeling of pleasure in the occiput as the prana ever so gently arrives there. At the bump in the back of the head. And then very gently you can lower your chin a little bit to open the central channel, open the back line. Stay rooted in the lower belly, don't leave that behind. But have a sense of opening the space. And then let the head rise. Back of the head rises on the in-breath, lifted by the breath. And then just have a sense of opening out the space along the back corridor, right in front of your spine, from your lower belly or your hara up to the occiput. So we're opening that space on each in-breath. It's empty, completely open. Just let go and fall back. Let go and fall back. Fall back along your back line. First, we might think this space along the back line, this corridor, this field, is a void. But as we tune into it, we realize it's not a void, it's alive. It's living space. And it has all these currents, little currents of energy and a feeling of somatic joyfulness. It's very subtle, incredibly subtle. It's still empty, but that emptiness has a lot to say. We're tapping into the open, empty awareness that has always been and always will be. It's what physicists call the quantum emptiness out of which being emerged. And the character, the qualities, the eventfulness of that space is the life force itself that came from the beginning of time and probably from before the beginning of time, that has always been, always been. Hildegard says, the life force is the divine. The life force is inseparable from love. It is love. When we tap into this most fundamental part of ourselves, We're tapping into the love that gave birth to everything. And the more we feel it, the more we know it in our bodies, the more compelled we are to express it. In opening and letting go into the very being of others. Again, we're not dissociating, we're not leaving our bodies to open to others. We are extending our somatic reality, our somatic experience, who we fundamentally are, to include others. There's all the difference in the world. Others become part of your life. Others are your life force, which isn't only inside, it's in all the abounding beauty and wonder and vast terror of the universe. And moment by moment and day by day, others bring this to us if only we would let go of ourselves and open. So this is the first step in developing what's called the bodhicitta body, which means discovering that our body is a body of love. The first step is coming into the body and meditating, sitting as we are here, in our posture, along the back line, and opening. And in the next week, I'd like you to work with this practice, and if you can meditate for 40 minutes or longer, that would be wonderful. And really explore this particular part of your body. Explore the back line, explore the open field, and see if you can notice how the space that you discover along your spine actually taps you into something much, much bigger, something that is infinite and also eternal. It's right there for you. It's right here. And then in future sessions, I want to begin with this practice and then show you how the bodhicitta body, step by step, is developed. This body, which is really ourselves, and bring us to a point where to be human is to love. And truly to love is to be human. To discover love in this unconditional and selfless sense is to arrive at the person that we have always been, but we could never find. Okay? So wonderful, thank you. It's wonderful to be able to share these teachings with you and practices. So I think at this point we're going to see what folks have been sending our way in terms of things to talk about. Hi, Elizabeth.
Hi, Reggie.
All set. What have you got?
We have a question from Marina in Italy.
Mm-hmm.
When I practice with the body, especially during the somatic descent, but also with the 10 points practice, sometimes it's all calm and quiet, but sometimes, especially starting from the feet, strange feelings occur, and horrible, horrifying images of blood, faces, etc. come to my mind's eye. The contact with the body can be a realm of bliss and/or torment. I generally host all this mess in spaciousness, and then it dissolves. But after the meditation, I realize there is something heavy and anxious remaining in my experience, and that's hanging around. How can I deal with these experiences? Is it right to welcome them anyway and let them go like this?
Well, I think, when we do this work, we have to make a certain kind of commitment. We have to be clear with ourselves about something. Are we interested in having a life where the unbelievable suffering of other people is not part of it? Is this what we want? Do we want to have a life where we don't have to be exposed to what other people have been through? Or, on the other hand, is our sense of our state of being and our spiritual journey such that we actually want to know and touch and love other people? If we have the latter motivation, then we are indeed, as the questioner indicates, we are opening ourselves to this world as it is. When we moved to Crestone over 10 years ago, Dharma Ocean moved to Crestone, Colorado, we were in the San Luis Valley, which is this beautiful, which I've mentioned, this beautiful valley floor, 8,000 feet, and these 14,000 foot mountains all around. It's very beautiful. But it was also the scene of unbelievable suffering on the part of Native Americans, particularly after the white people came. And we do this month-long retreat in the winter called the Datun, the Winter Datun. People come for a week, or they come for all 4 weeks, whatever. And I think it was the second one we did, people started having visions, and people started feeling things, and it wasn't just a few people, it was everybody. And it was almost as if the earth itself held the suffering of the Native American people who lived in that valley and were in that valley and who were butchered. Old people and children and babies, mothers and fathers, butchered by the cavalry. And they came up and they were specific and they were detailed, and there were scenes of torment and suffering, and they were reported. And this was, one of these things, meditation, basically so many times in my own personal life, and I think everybody else's, it opens doors that you never even suspected were there. And this our students always give names to Datuns, and that one was the crying Datun. And truly, we wept our way through it, and it was shocking, and it was horrifying, and it was confusing for me. I've never experienced anything like that in my whole entire life. But, we had to make a choice. We had to either open ourselves to what was going on. And I think, the fact of when she works with her feet, a lot of this stuff comes up. I think it's in the earth. I think Carlos Castaneda actually says this, that a lot of times the suffering of people is, it's in the earth, it's in the rocks, it's in the natural environment, and I think that's what happened there. The more we open ourselves in this world that we live in now, you can't open yourself in a restricted way. You can't just open yourself to things that are positive and things that feel good and things that make you happy. openness is openness, and openness means being open to the actual world we live in and the actual people and the actual suffering they go through. And there's no other way to love people unless you do that. But it does raise the question, which the questioner also says, how do I handle it? And there is a tendency, I think, for all of us to hang on to intense experiences. It's just part of the human neurological survival system, that we want to keep track of the things that were really powerful in a positive way, so we can repeat them, and we want to keep track of the things that were painful so we can avoid them. On the spiritual path, this whole, it's not just painful, but it can be enormously joyful and pleasurable and hugely liberating. We have to come back to our bodies, we have to come back to the back line, as I was just showing you, and we have to really let go of our investment in whatever happened. If we don't let go, we fall into what C.G. Jung called spiritual inflation. We become identified with either very negative things or very positive things. But the thing is, our basic nature is always free. And if you're willing to return to your basic nature, the space along the back line, then that is your way of letting go of being hurtfully invested in either positive or negative. So that's a great question, and there's a lot there in it, and I think it shows us the spiritual journey we're talking about here is real. It's a real thing. This isn't some kind of lifestyle choice. This is a commitment to engage the actual situation of this planet in a direct and open and unguarded and undefended way. So yeah, thank you very much for that question. It was beautiful.
Dunya from California.
Mm-hmm.
I've been working with earth breathing and the practice of opening various places in the body to unconditioned space. Sometimes I feel, though, during these somatic meditations, like I am being pulled into the source of being too much. At those times I find myself getting dizzy and slightly nauseous, and I seem to get swamped by the experience of the unfathomable. My awareness is no longer sharp when this happens, but rather devolves into a kind of swoon. Is this a problem? Should I back off or sharpen up my awareness when this happens? Or is it a fine thing to experience this kind of overwhelm by the source sometimes?
Well, we come back to the importance of pacing ourselves on the journey. Fundamentally, there is no you to be overwhelmed. You basically open and there's no you, there's just space. There's no big deal, it's no problem. But in the beginning, we do think there is a me, and what we tend to do when we have powerful experiences, again, is we tend to identify with them. And identifying with the space of the source is, it'll lead to what you're describing. I would actually back off a little bit. What you want to do, opening to the vast space of the earth or of the back line, is be very, very gentle. And really, it's a matter of opening your body. If you open your head into it, you're going to get super dizzy. If you open your left brain into it, it's not going to work out. So you have to really be sure that what you're doing here is you're extending your somatic awareness to include the space of the earth, or you're extending your somatic awareness to include the space of the back line. When you do it that way, you're completely home, you're completely grounded, and you are completely safe. So just to say one more time, when we are used to meditating as a left brain activity, and we are actually, putting our mental awareness one place or another, then that's when we have problems dissociating, or we have problems feeling overwhelmed, or we have problems over-identifying with something, with some emotion or some feeling. Stay in your body, and then things will be as they are, and there's no problem whatsoever. So I think the key instruction here is don't push it ever, because when you push, that's a left brain thing. That's the thinking mind is doing the pushing. Don't identify, because that's also a thinking mind thing. Just come back to your body and stay in your body. That instruction goes at any time that you feel any kind of uncertainty in any practice. Just come back, be in your body, feel your body, and see what your body wants. Your body will show you, what's needed at this moment. Yeah, good question. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Max from the United Kingdom. As a person of color trying to practice Dharma in the UK for the last 25 years, where it can sometimes seem all the race and class discriminations that make up the surrounding society are duplicated in the Dharma organizations, there are not that many non-white faces. I would like to thank you for the way you talk about and acknowledge the hardships in lives of the lower caste Mahasiddhas and how the depth of their suffering was used as fuel on the path.
Mm-hmm.
My question is, I have worked for many years in human rights and as a psychotherapist with survivors of torture and genocide. Coming face to face with such human destruction mocks easy cliches and obliterates the theistic approach to Dharma.
Mm-hmm.
Therefore, could you please speak of what you believe or feel Trungpa's approach was to making sense of unremitting horror and the intelligence active in human destruction?
Well, I don't think you can make sense of human horror, and I don't think you can ever feel okay about anything that happens that harms or damages or destroys people. I think Trungpa's teaching was you have to open to what is. And, if you happen to be in a concentration camp situation or a maximum security prison or a situation of you're a child and you're in a state of slavery, these things they're not in any shape, way or form okay. And they lead the human heart to become frantic in the search for justice. And I think as Dharma practitioners, we have to make room for the unique horrors and the torments and the suffering of our own lives fully and completely. And then those things become tremendously helpful to us in a strange kind of way. I was, for 35 years, I helped build a community, and then build it brick by brick and developed teachings and taught thousands of people in this community. And all of a sudden, 11 years ago, I found myself exiled, really sent into exile. And for me as a privileged white person, it was a very, very shocking experience. And even I would go into King Supers and people would turn around and walk away that had been close friends. And it seemed like really death itself, and I started to realize why exile was such a severe punishment in the old days. You were separated from your community, and we can't live without community. We can't. But what came out of it was I understood a lot more about how people are, and all these people who had been my friends who turned against me, and we don't need to go into details. But number one, I was incredibly angry, and I felt that I had been used all those 35 years by everybody around me, so very unreasonably angry, totally beside myself with rage and upset and so on. But then the strange thing happened is over time I began to realize actually that's actually the way it is, and that's actually the way people are, and we all are, and I'm that way, and everybody's that way. We're fundamentally out for ourselves, and we fundamentally don't care about other people. And over time, I have developed a lot more sympathy for the human person and his or her situation, no matter who they are, where they are. So I think, coming back to the siddhas, and coming back to actually Vincent Harding's comment that those who have suffered the most understand the most. And there's no way to minimize the suffering that people go through, and there's no way to make it okay. On the other hand, the human heart is in the service of life. The thinking mind is not always in the service of life. Sometimes it's in the service of death. But the human heart is in the service of life with a capital L and life with a small l. And the human heart will not, if the human heart is open, it will not put up with injustice to other people. It's not in its own nature. And it will sacrifice in a reckless way whatever it has to bring life to other people and to protect the life that is in other people. So I think I agree that many Dharma organizations, not to speak of other spiritual organizations, continue to be classist and racist and sexist and ageist and all the rest of it. And I think, these days we need to work together, those of us who feel called to change that situation. And it doesn't matter whether we're Catholics or Protestants or Sufis or Buddhists or indigenous people. That's the whole notion of communitas, Victor Turner's notion, that we can discover community outside of the official structures, and then we have to extend it to other people. And that's kind of how I feel about it. I would love to meet Max, and I'd love to have conversation with him. Maybe when we go to England in the spring, I can meet him.
Robin from Wisconsin. My dad is in the hospital, and it's changing my life and how I see the world. Any advice on how to help someone who is sick, dying, and suffering greatly?
Well, I think the practice, which is many Buddhist hospice workers and caregivers use, is called basic attendance. It's used at Naropa in working with the elderly and the dying. And what it means is that you just be with them, you sit with them, and you be in your body, you be in your heart, and you open, open, be present, be there for them, and at a certain point be them. Let what they're feeling, let what they're going through just waft into you and fill your own state of being. So there's no real separation. We as humans, more than anything else, want to be seen by other people. The most terrible kind of suffering is the suffering that we do in solitude, where no one sees us, no one knows. So being with folks who are in extreme states, whatever they may be, and particularly those who are in the throes of dying, being there with them and simply holding them in your awareness and opening your heart to them, it's hugely, hugely, hugely impactful. And then you can see, there's an intuitive knowingness that arises out of that kind of basic attendance that shows you, what's needed and how to respond. But you're really responding in terms of from the other person's point of view. You're not coming in with your ideas of what's going to be helpful. You sit and you wait until, in some sense, the body of the other person tells you. Their state of being tells you and calls you and invites you. It's very powerful.
Timothy from British Columbia writes, could you speak about how to work with parts of myself that grasp to those I love most dearly, and the terrible fear and sort of unconscious acting out that happens every time these relationships are threatened? It seems to me I would be able to be kinder to everyone if I could have some sort of surrender to the future, some sort of confidence in it. It feels like there are some child parts of me really involved with this.
Well, I think in a way we have to go back to something more fundamental. We need to, all of us as human beings are driven by desire. Even breathing is a desire. Even the way our cells work is an expression of desire. Cells want to live. Cells seek nourishment. They seek oxygen. They seek stimulation. So there's no problem with the tremendous amount of attachment we have to other people. It's part of being human. It's so important. It's so important to who we are. And that attachment can be neurotic, and it can be sane, and usually it's both. It can be incredibly strong. It can be overwhelming. But it's that kind of attachment, that kind of sense of connection with other people is utterly sacred. And in a sense, it's what makes us human, that we care so much. But as the questioner indicates, we can be overwhelmed by it. And in the practicing lineage, I've been talking about, since we started these live streams, I've been talking about how as we practice and as we open, our experience becomes more intense. And our experience of attachment, our experience of our own neurosis, our experience of loving other people, we discover how much we really care. All of that, once you remove the ego is a kind of braking mechanism. It's a braking mechanism on life itself. And once we take the braking mechanism out, we really become, in a gradually developing way, completely open to what life is and what it means to be human. But the only way we can handle that is if we have some connection with what's called the natural state. We need to train ourselves in the kind of sitting that I was doing with you tonight, and the kind of sitting that opens up that basic space which we really feel is our home. It's our home base, it's our home ground, it's who we truly are, and at the same time, ironically, there's a sense that it has no beginning and no end, and that it has no boundaries. That is, in fact, who we really are. And we, the only way we can handle all of the ups and downs of life is if we are deeply rooted in that basic nature. And then we can make room for everything. If we are not rooted in our basic nature, if we can't tune into that basic space along the back line and relax into it and feel relief and freedom, then we're like a ping pong ball just bouncing around the inside of a twirling cage. We're completely out of control, and we have all these things happening, and our mind is jumping all over the place. We have to realize that situation as is cannot be addressed directly. We can only address it indirectly by developing a connection with the eternal part of ourselves. And that is very doable. That's what Buddhism is all about. I'm not talking necessarily about the conventional Buddhism that goes around, but the practicing lineages of Buddhism are all about that one thing. Develop a relationship with your basic ground, with the groundless ground of your own unborn nature, and then everything becomes workable. So that would be my suggestion, to go back to square one, and then go back to square zero, and to work on that.
This one's long. Sean from Galway, Ireland. The question is, last week in response to a question about Nietzsche, you remarked that a number of European philosophers and poets seem to have independently stumbled onto ways of looking at and being in the world that are remarkably similar to the perspective of Vajrayana. Can you speak further to the relationship between creativity and tantric practice? I have to admit that since I started meditating seriously, I have come to see that much of my own creative practice, I write fiction, is driven by neurosis and arises out of a desire to fortify the boundaries of my ego. Also, I find my tendency to drift off into creative reverie is at odds with the instruction to stay present to the constant unfolding of life. Is it possible to practice art as a tantric practitioner in a healthy way, especially the kind of long-form art, a novel, let's say, that demands considerable investment of time and energy on behalf of the creator? If so, how does one distinguish between creative expression that arises out of truly open space and that which is driven by an ego agenda?
Well, that's a great question, and I actually think the questioner, completely and totally answered the question. When we are creative people, and all humans are creative one way or the other, you can tell when you're doing something out of fear or paranoia, or ambition, or anxiety. I mean, granted, you have to have some self-awareness to be able to do that. You have to have some. But that's where meditation comes in. Once you begin to let go of your own investment in getting the book done or making certain points or whatever it may be, there is a process that unfolds. In Tibetan it's called hlundrup, which means spontaneous action. And it's not all that mysterious. What happens is your own process, you have something you have to write, and rather than thinking about it, you sit with it. You sit down and you just do your practice in the morning, and you open your mind, and your awareness is going to show you what you need to do. So the creative process at that point is you are following the dictates of your own unborn nature rather than actually doing this out of some kind of ego strategy or plan. This is very, very interesting. I talked with a woman yesterday who's writing a book, and the main issue was that we talked about was not writing the book from the outside, which is what other people think and how long the book should be, and there's an average number of pages for successful books. That's ego-driven writing, and it's not what he's looking for, because he understands, he knows what he's looking for. He just wants to know how to find it. But if you set that aside and you let the dictates of your own soma lead you forward, whether you're a painter, a musician, or writer, that's how it works. I know for myself, even you might think, well, this doesn't really work for academic books, but the first book I wrote, which was published 30 years ago, or 20 years ago, a very long academic monograph, that's how I wrote the book. And I tried to write it the other way and I couldn't do it. So I'd sit down, I'd do my practice every day, I'd go on retreat. And out of that, it came to me what the book needed to be and how the book needed to be. And even down to details of you need to proofread this by reading it out loud twice, this 550-page book. So the creative process it's not that mysterious, but you have to weed out your ego in order to really release it. If you read about the great composers, that's how it worked. Handel's Messiah, which is one of the great pieces of religious music ever written, came out of a period of unbelievable depression. He wrote operas, Italian operas, and the market dried up. People weren't interested in operas anymore. It's what he knew how to do, and it's what he kept trying, and he couldn't do it. And eventually he just gave up, and he went into retreat, and he was just living in this house. He had one housekeeper, and unbelievably depressed unto death. And then the Messiah appeared. And he said it came out of nowhere. And he said, after he wrote the Hallelujah chorus, I felt as if I had gazed on the face of Almighty God. And when we hear that piece of music, we feel the same way. And that kind of thing cannot happen because of the ego. It comes through utterly surrendering our own viewpoint and opening ourselves and trusting what happens. And that's what he did. And of course his whole life after that changed because of this experience of utter ego death that he went through. So I think for Sean, it's very doable, but I would recommend a lot of meditation and learning how to distinguish between ego-driven work and then the genuine upwelling of creativity, which will 100% guaranteed arise for you if you make space for it. So maybe that's enough. We've been talking about not running these live streams too long, and what I'm thinking now is maybe an hour and 15 minutes would be our max, and we've kind of hit that at this point. Mm-hmm. So I want to thank everybody for being here. I want to let you know that I'm going to be away next week, but what I would like to do, if the staff can figure it out, is I'd like to pre-record so we can keep going with this practice that I'm doing. And I'm not quite sure. I don't know if you're free, but I mean, hopefully, maybe people can send in some more questions in the next few days, so we can even do the Q&A thing, on a pre-recorded basis. And then 2 weeks from tonight, I will be back, and we'll do another live one. So next week it'll be pre-recorded, but it's part of the training I want to do with you this fall. So I hope you'll be able to tune in.
Thank you all so much for joining us this evening, or this morning if you're in New Zealand. If you're inspired to attend a Dharma Ocean retreat, there's a number of them coming up. Please see our program calendar on the website. Our next public retreat is with the Dharma Ocean senior teacher, Al Blom. It's titled Silence, Overcoming the Age of Distraction. And if you would like to explore more of Reggie's teachings, online we recommend the Dharma Ocean podcast. You can link to it underneath the teachings header on the website. And this week's episode is about a talk Reggie offered at Naropa University on non-theism. We look forward to connecting with you again, and thank you so much for joining us. Have a beautiful evening.